Welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the MasterYourMix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thank you so much for being here today. Today, my guest is Alan Evans. Alan is a multi-instrumentalist. He's a recording engineer, producer, vocalist, writer. He's the owner of Ironwax Studios, and he's also a member of the band Soulive. And in addition to that, he's also a co-owner of Vintage League Music. If you're a fan of old school soul music and you love that like old Motown vibe, then you will love Alan's recordings. A big part of his clientele and the sound that he records is that old school sound, and he's really nailed it. And it's really interesting to hear from him in this interview because he's doing it using a lot of modern recording equipment. And a lot of people think that to get that vintage sound, you need to have all this old vintage gear. But it's really refreshing to hear from him in this interview because he talks about how he's able to utilize modern equipment to still get that sound. So I'm really excited for you to hear this interview. There's a lot of great stuff in here. So let's just jump right into it. This is my interview with Alan Evans. Well, Alan Evans, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. How you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, man. Of course. For people who might not know your background, can you give us a little bit of your story and how you ultimately got to where you are now?
Yeah, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, born in 1974. And by the time I was 11 years old, I was gigging out in clubs around town. I grew up in a musical family. My brother and I were playing music all the time when we were like little kids. Once it came time to, I should say I started gigging out around town when I was like 11. But then by the time I was about 14 or 15, I was going out on the road, like touring around, you know. So by the time it was, I turned 18, it was time to graduate high school. I came to a crossroads. I was like, well, I could either stay here in Buffalo and be kind of like a big fish in a small pond, or join my friend who I was in a band with at the time, and we just decided to move to New York City. And from there, again, still toured around a lot, wow, I guess that's the very beginnings of things, you know what I mean? And that band was called Moon Boot Lover. And we were around until, my brother and I were in the band until 96. And then I took I retired from music for a little while. And then after that, I found myself out in San Diego playing with the Great Boy All-Stars, Carl Denson. And then I decided to, start my own band again, and that would be a band called Soulive. So anyway, so that's like, and that's kind of what I've been doing on the playing side. But in terms of recording, I started like recording my own, records and things like that when it's probably about 13 or so, something like that. And so it's always been a mix of playing live and recording. So most people have known me over the years for being on stage and, from my band Soulive, but I recorded and mixed a lot of those records. And yeah, it's just been something that I've always done. I mean, music is like breathing to me. So
love it, man. So how did you first start to learn how to like produce your own records and record?
We have a older brother named is Rod, and he's 19 years older than I am. But the thing about Rod, he's a audiophile. He an avid record collector. So growing up in the house when he was living there, I was surrounded by Macintosh, stereo equipment and tons of records. He was a DJ as well. So that was part of it. Just kind of like having a sibling who was very much into sound. And he didn't teach me anything about recording, but it got me to listen to music a lot differently than everybody else I knew. So that's one side of it. The other side of it was I just had a curious nature. So my father played drums not professionally, but played drums. But but beside that, he was just a builder. He was a creator. You know what I mean? He was a teacher. But, you know, there was always like we were, you know, on the weekends, he was always building something, fixing something around the house, you know, taking things apart. And so I would see that, you know, growing up, and all of a sudden I realized that, you know, that's when I started taking stereo equipment apart, and I started taking like amps apart and all kind, you know, just kind of, again, that curious nature. So, so that's that. Those were the seeds, I guess I would say. But I remember vividly when my brother Neil and I went to visit our brother Rod when later on when he was in the Navy, and for Thanksgiving we flew down to Bayonne, New Jersey, where he was stationed, and we were staying with him, and we walked in his room. And again, like I said, he's an avid record collector, but I remember walking in and he had a, you know, the classic, you just have a bunch of records stacked on the floor. And the first record I saw just grabbed my attention like nothing has ever done in my life. And it was Jimi Hendrix, Axis Bold Love. And I remember I said, Rod, can you put that on? Because the record cover just grabbed me. So he put it on, and I'm listening to Axis Bold Love on vinyl over a Macintosh, you know, system, you know what I'm saying? And man, I was hearing sounds coming out of the speaker that I just had never heard before. So that began my journey as a guitar player. And I was 12 or 13 at the time. But aside from that really began my journey as a recording engineer, because it wasn't just that I wanted to play guitar like Jimi Hendrix, but I wanted to create those sounds. Like I just had to figure out what was going on, you know, and that really just kind of started the journey. Now, like I said, I've been playing in bands for quite some time. So by the time I was around 13 or 14, a band I was in, you know, we won a battle of the bands, and what we won was studio time. You know what I mean? So it was like the graveyard shifts. You know, like, you know, we went in at like 11 at night or whatever for like, I think maybe it was just one session. You know, but by then the recording bug kind of hit me, and I remember like talking to the engineer, who, you know, I was like 13 or 14 at the time, so he didn't have any time for me. Plus, it's like 11 at night, you know, and all this kind of stuff. You know, we went till like 4 or 5 in the morning or whatever. But his attitude towards me was such that, you know, I would have suggestions. Of course, I was young. I didn't know what I was talking about, but I had ideas. And he just kept shutting me down. You know, he's like, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm the engineer. You just go play drums kind of thing. And after that, I was like, you know what? I can do a better job than him. So I just, you know, my dumb young self. But that's that pushed me over the edge. After that, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to pay someone to, of course I had to over the years, but there's a lot to learn, but that's what got me started.
Yeah. I love that, man. I think that that's such a common story that I find happens on this podcast, is that people have that experience in the studio where, like, you know, just being in that environment was very inspiring. But then there's like that one person who either like just ruins the quality of the record, and like, you know, their skills aren't at the point that like they can't get your songs to sound the way you hear them in your head, or they just have a horrible attitude and just ruin that experience for you. So it's like, it lights that spark under so many people's butts to just like want to just do this and be better at it. You know, it's like, I think that it happens a lot on this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, the funny thing is, man, so I had a few experiences like that in Buffalo, and it wasn't until I left Buffalo and moved to New York City and started working in, you know, I hate to use the term real studios, but at the time, but it was a big jump from the studios I was recording in Buffalo. And in fact, they were real studios that were making records that many of us have heard many times. But what the interesting thing was I wouldn't say I was shy, from my experiences with these previous experiences, but I was a little guarded with, how I would approach like the engineer. But what I quickly found is that the more successful engineers I worked with, and I've gotten to work with some really, big name cats, the more open they were to sharing their knowledge. You know what I mean? So I was thinking, oh man, this guy's recorded this record and this record. I'm kind of nervous, like I'm not going to, and they're like, so I'd say, oh, how do you do? Oh yeah, come over here. Like basically stop the session to show me how to, whatever it is. And that's when I realized, man, like that was a great experience for me. Like these cats have all the, from my point of view at the time, all the success in the world, all these credits, and they're just like sharing their knowledge, they're with nobody. I was nobody at the time, you know what I'm saying? And so to this day, ever since then, and to this day, that's why I teach, you know what I'm saying? But when I'm in a recording session, there's this, man, every band has the engineer in the band. Of
course.
You know what I'm saying? Most times there's the one cat, or a couple, and hey, man, there's no secrets in this. There are no secrets. You know what I'm saying? Like I could show anybody I could show them exactly what I do. They could come into my studio, use my same gear, and whatever they do is going to sound different in the end. Because their ears are different. Their choices are going to be different. So it's like, man, why not share all this knowledge that I've been lucky to, acquire over the years?
Yeah. Hey, that's exactly the reason why I started this podcast and my website in the first place. Is just like, same thing. It's like, there's always that one guy in the band who's, like you said, is the engineer, who's always asking questions. And, you're like, okay, cool. Like, this is how I do it, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I had that conversation so many times that I was like, there's more people like that out there. Let's just get this information out there. Let's help more people make more music. Cause, with that, we can make more impact in the world, right? It's like, I don't want people to feel like they can't put out their music because it's not good enough or whatever, it's like, there's a lot of great songs out there that haven't been discovered yet. And let's just get those out there, right?
Exactly. I mean, for me, man, like I said, in my teaching and just in any interaction I have with someone, my goal is to hopefully get them to a point where they're comfortable with their choices. You know what I'm saying? Because that's all that matters in the end. People, like worry about, man, don't compare your stuff to anybody else. You know what I mean? Like if it sounds good to you, it's good. You know what I mean? But the problem is people, a lot of people, I should say, some people, they get very caught up in, going down the YouTube wormhole of like, oh, what does this plugin do? What does this compressor do? What does this do? What does this, like, man, just, I want people to just feel confident and comfortable. And once you can do that consistently, like with your own, your own mixes, your own writing, whatever it is, people are going to dig your music. It's not rocket science. This isn't rocket science. You know what I mean? Of course, there are some rules involved, I guess, you know what I mean? And obviously it's like good to learn the rules so you know how to break them, or you know what I'm saying? But the main thing is confidence. You know what I'm saying? It's confidence. And so having a little bit of knowledge will help you build that confidence, talking to, listening to podcasts, listen to people, like you said, you may listen to an hour-long podcast, and if you only get one thing out of it that you can add to your tool belt, your tool, your chest, then that's great. You know what I'm saying? But so that's what I try to do, man. Just try to inspire people to just be creative and comfortable in their choices.
Love it, man. Love it. So it sounds like you were kind of in the studio as a musician and kind of observing what all these other people were doing. Would you say that that's kind of how you learned, like just by being in the room with people, or were you then like, at what point did you start to get your own recording equipment and take that on yourself?
Well, I mean, I was still pretty young. I mean, I was like mid-teens, when I started, really getting into recording with my own gear and things like that. It was a lot different back then. There was no YouTube. There was maybe like Mix Magazine, little things like that. But, I didn't really check those out too much. So yeah, it was just like a few experiences in the studio observing. And that's the thing. Luckily, I was a good drummer back in the day. So it wasn't like I was spending hours and hours, trying to get a good drum take down. Now, the flip side of that was I was getting good drum takes down. So then it was just like I was just sitting on the couch while, the guitar player was like, playing a million passes of a guitar solo. But in that time, though, I utilized that time to my benefit. Yeah, you're right. I just paid attention. I just watched, that's the thing. Like if I got some shade from some engineer, didn't have any time for me, I didn't walk out the studio like, oh man, screw this dude, I'm out of here. It's like, all right, that's cool. I just hung out in the back and I just watched then, just shut up and watched. I guess unknowingly, I turned myself into like a studio assistant. Every good studio assistant should do that. Just shut up and watch. You know what I'm saying? Just, don't comment on anything, just watch and learn. So that's what I did. So from those experiences, my band at the time we were rolling around with our own PA, So it was like an old PV mixer, which had it was really dope. You can still find them, but, it had like spring reverb in it and all this kind of stuff. But the cool thing about it is that's when I learned that, you can use, I was like, what are these inserts? That's when I figured out, you can use you can tap the inserts for direct outs, you know what I'm saying? And it is, again, so that's how I just started building, and learning. So. And I still have a lot of those recordings. They're not very good, but but there's some cool stuff in there though. You know what I mean? There was some cool stuff in there because that was the other thing back then. It was this was like recording the tape. You know what I mean? So a lot of times I was either bouncing between decks, doing that real old school stuff, and then finally, when you got into multi-track recording with tape decks, and then when ADATs came out and all that kind of stuff, that was but the cool thing is back then it wasn't even learned, you had to commit to stuff. There was no like what we have today, you just committed to everything, all the drums on the one track, kind of stuff, some Beatles type stuff or whatever. I'm just that's just the way it was. You had to work with what you had, and I didn't have a lot,
but it forces you to be a better engineer because you're listening really critically to everything you're recording. You're making it all count.
Exactly. Well, so yeah, so it makes you a better engineer for sure, but it also makes you a better producer. It makes you a better songwriter, everything, musician. Because again, it's funny. A lot of people dislike the music from the 80s. I don't know if much anymore because maybe it's kind of come around and maybe it's already gone again. But the one thing about music leading up to the 80s, in the 80s and maybe partly in the 90s, but it was arrangement. When you have and still, man, obviously back in the day, in bigger studios, you had a lot of tracks to work with. You could, if you could sync up 2 24-track machines or even more, which has been done, but those were on really huge budget albums. But a lot of records that, I grew up listening to were not the case. They're 16 tracks, 24 tracks. That was probably the norm. That sounds like a lot. 24 tracks sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. You know what I'm saying? When you break it down. So anyway, so back then, the songs were so great because cats were had to really make decisions, in terms, and this is before you even hit record, but knowing you had to hit record with a certain number of tracks, it's man, if that, they really worked out the chorus, the bridge, it wasn't just let's just throw this on there and we'll figure it out later. There was none of that, or very little, I should say. So anyway, I've brought that mentality. I still have that to this day. You know what I'm saying? Like, and yeah, so all of that has definitely helped me kind of become the engineer I am today. And I really wish it's a double-edged sword, of course. I think it's amazing that, you know, all the technology that we have available to us these days. And I really laugh, man. Like, hey, man, I got nothing against companies trying to make some bread, you know, selling interfaces or whatever it is. I got no problem with it. But man, man, it's really funny. I don't go on many forums and anything anymore. I have to spend my time making music, right? But it's really funny when cats start arguing over this minutia over, you know, these recording devices and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, man, do you know that George Martin in the Beatles would have been psyched to have GarageBand and, you know, I mean, and like a M audio interface? Do you know what those cats would have done with that? You know what I'm saying? Like, so, I mean, yo, at some point, you know, you just have to like get to just making music. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have like the craziest gear back in the day, and I still don't. But, you know, I don't use that as an excuse. You know what I'm saying? Like, to me, it's like back in the day, I had to do what I had to do with what I had, and I learned a lot because of it. So I guess in the end, there's no excuses these days. Really, I mean, man, cats are making full-on dope albums on iPhones. You know Absolutely. What I'm saying? So,
yeah,
and that's why I'm saying, hey, man, you know, like, I mean, you give any cat from back in the day the technology that we have right now, man, come on, man,
for sure. Well, I'm curious to know, like, I mean, you kind of said earlier that you've taken a little bit of that old school recording approach and you still do that to this day. And you specifically work on a lot of music that has this like vintage type of sound to it. So I'm wondering, like, how much of that vintage sound do you think has to do with that process of recording versus like the equipment that we're using and all that kind of stuff?
I'd say it's the majority of it has to do with the song. You know, the song's first. That, hands down. Song comes first. And after that, I feel, at least for me, song comes first. And then that informs my decisions in terms of the instruments being used. You know what I'm saying? Or, you know, or sometimes it can go either way. But the tone, like, you know, sometimes I'll come in the studio and you just like pick up a guitar and start playing. And that'll just inspire a song, you know what I'm saying? So a certain tone. But it really comes down to that. The gear, maybe that's a small part of it, honestly. But for me, it's all about the song, you know? I mean, it's all about the song. And then again, the choices in instruments, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you know, like, I don't know how many times I've been asked to, especially on the mix side, oh man, I want the drums to sound like Bonham, you know, everybody, you know, Bonham is like, just, that's, of course. But it's like, yo, bro, you know, like, well, that's just not going to happen. First of all, like, you know, you cut the drums with, you know, 15 or 16 microphones. It's a brand new, you know, I don't want to name any brands, but it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Some brand new, you know, XRX drum set with clear drum heads on it and all this kind of stuff, you know what I mean? And okay, cool, you put a microphone up in the stairwell, great. But, you know, and then on top of that, like the song, you know, like you didn't, it's like, man, yo, you better go dig him up and revitalize him if you want, you know what I'm saying, for real, you know. But the thing is, the point is like you've already missed the mark, like on the choice of instrument. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you want a Bonham sound, well, man, get, you know, at least get the right drum set. You know what I'm saying? Get the, you know, like ease up on the microphones. You know what I mean? Like, and maybe, and the tune, like, does the tune kind of evoke that spirit, that feeling? You know, like, you know, Probably not, so yeah, man. So I think that's what it really comes down to.
For sure. I totally agree with that. I think that it's so easy to be inspired by something and admire a tone, but if you're not considering how your music fits in with that tone, then it's never going to happen. Like you need to, I think that's why, like, a band like Greta Van Fleet or something like that, that's why they can sound like Zeppelin, because their songs sound like Zeppelin, but if they were playing like metal songs or something, it would never sound like Zeppelin,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. It's funny you mentioned, because the first time I heard Greta Van Fleet, man, I was like, what in the world is, it sounded like some lost Zeppelin track or something, I don't think I go that far on my productions, you know what I'm saying? But I respect it. I totally respect it. You know what I'm saying? But
well, to me, it's like when you listen to a record like that, it almost sounds like everything is intentional to be that specific type of sound, right? So
yeah, exactly.
When you do that, you're going to get that sound, obviously.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, one thing that I'm really curious to know about you and your production style is that, like, you do work on a lot of soul music and stuff that has that vintage quality to it. And I'm wondering, do you find it difficult to capture that old school vibe when so much of today's technology or equipment is designed to be so modern sounding and clean and pristine? Like, how do you go about getting that vintage sound when we have modern equipment?
Well, yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I get the question. Oh man, people want to come and record the studio. Oh, what tape machines are you using this? I'm not using any tape machines. I sold all my tape machines years ago. You know what I'm saying? I use all a lot of that, the modern technology available to me. I think it's great, but I've had the opportunity over the years to really use a lot of the hardware that a lot of these cats are emulating. So I feel like I have a leg up on from that aspect. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know what an LA2A does in real. Actually I have one, but or 1176 or a Pultec, whatever. I've used those in real life. So using the plugins is kind of second nature to me. I commit a lot going in. I don't leave myself a lot of wiggle room at all on the mix end. And that's what a lot of cats really dig when they come to record here. One, it doesn't take me long. I'm at an advantage because pretty much everything here is set up and ready to roll all the time. It'll take maybe a band 30 minutes, 40 minutes from the time they walk in, we can be, recording the first take of something. So that's cool. But yeah, I commit going in. I am a Studio One user, and that's what I use as my DAW. And they have a feature of, you can record plugins going on the inputs, very similar to like you would do with like UAD or something like that. So I do that. So and that's the thing. Like, so when a band, I say just play a tune, play something, and then start recording. And so by the time they're done playing the first verse of whatever, I can push up the faders to unity, and it's going to sound pretty much like a record. So. And then again, that makes the mixing just a lot more fun, But yeah, I have some outboard pieces that, are really kind of help me get my sound. A lot of my studio is called Iron Wax Studios because of my love of Transformers, That's kind of like the, people always talk about, tube gear and this and that. Tubes are cool, but it's the iron in front of those tubes and after those tubes that really, like, that's where, for me, that's, so you'd get a pretty good kick out of listening to like my multi-track files, you know what I'm saying? Like, wow, that's the kick drum sound. Like, it's it's not clean, you know what I'm saying? But for me, it's like, I don't do a lot of stuff in solo mode. You know what I mean? It's like, for me, it's all about the sum of everything, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, man, I mean, I grew up in the analog age. That's when I learned how to do what I do, and I've just stuck to it. I didn't, when digital really came around and people were like really pushing levels to, I just kept doing what I do. And luckily that's been a benefit, because now everybody's designing a plugin that's a analog emulation, you know what I'm saying? But with that said, they like to see signal that would exist in the analog realm. So I get a lot of people who hit me up, on the teaching side, or just when we're in the studio, it's like, oh man, I got like this, whatever, 1073 plug, whatever. It's like, oh man, it sounds awful. It's like, well, yeah, man, but of course it does, because like you're driving the hell out of it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's, so come on, back, and let's live in you gotta think in the analog realm here, So just, I mean, man, I guess that's the long answer to your question. I use all the modern stuff, but I just approach it like I would if I was recording the tape.
Yep, love that, man. I think, yeah, it makes sense. It's like, if you're going for that kind of sound, like why not, to touch back on that John Bonham example, it's like, why not go back to like the way it was done, follow that same process, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, what I realize, and obviously I'm constantly learning, obviously, I'm not a master at this by any stretch of the imagination, but what I have kind of realized over the years is that for a time I was doing way too much, like I was just too much EQ, too much compression, too much of everything, to try and get something to sound like something. And it was at one point when I started mixing albums for people that I didn't record. I remember one in particular, actually, was a Lettuce album, this band Lettuce. And a good friend of mine, Joel Hamilton, recorded the record. And he actually did some mixing on the album, but then the band asked me to mix some songs. But I remember I got the tunes, finally, and I loaded them up, and I just, pushed the faders up, and I was like, damn, this sounds, there's nothing to do, all of a sudden that made my job a lot easier. And it's like one of those things, this, but that solidified it. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, okay, it was just recorded really well, really great players. And all my job now is to not mess it up. So you just don't do a lot. You know what I mean? Like, it's so funny. People it's so easy these days to not, again, go back to spending the time with, is that the right microphone for said instrument? Is that the right guitar for said song? What I'm saying? Like, are the players up to? Are the players able to play the song in a fashion that's going to be believable?
Yeah, I love that. I think that it's it is so easy to get deep in the weeds of like, all of these plugins and all of this like modern way to do things. And especially if you do listen to a lot of different genres of music, you're going to find those differences between genres. And that often dictates like your workflow as well, right? If you're in like the modern metal world, you're probably adding tons of shit to your plugin chain and, going real extreme with EQs and stuff, because that's how that world is. So, when you switch back to like a soul music or soul song like that, it has to be a different approach, because that's just not the way things were done.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I guess that's the thing, man. I'm very comfortable in my skin. I mean, I know what I do well, and that's why people come to me. Like, I mean, I record a lot of stuff other than soul stuff, but the theme though would be people that want something organic sounding, what I mean? So I record a lot of folk music, or I do rock, but again, it's not like heavy rock. It's I guess it's kind of that would be the overarching theme.
Well, as far as that organic sound, like, let's just say like vintagey kind of sound, how would you describe what that sound is for someone versus like comparing that to like today's modern rock music that's on the radio?
That's a good question. I guess my perception, or my idea, is just a sense of space, I guess. Yeah, I mean, how do you describe that to someone who maybe not know what I'm talking about or understand that? But I feel that a lot of more modern music I hear, and this is not a knock on it because I listen to a lot of modern music, obviously, I dig a lot of it, but sometimes I feel it's like this, it's almost like a virtual reality. It's like our hyper, or like a very hyper reality. I mean, it's this very, or almost like a caricature of reality or something, I mean, like, and that's cool, like, whereas I guess what I do is more of, more reality based and kind of, sound, I mean, it's like kind of almost like if you walked into the studio, that's pretty much what you're going to hear, for the most part. I mean, obviously there's, there's stuff that goes on the mixing side and on the production mixing side that, trying to, in telling the story of the song, you're, pushing certain envelopes or whatever, sonics or whatever. But I'd say it's just a more realistic painting of what's going on in the music, what I mean? So
for sure. Yeah, it's funny. I was just interviewing before I got on with you. I was interviewing Chris Baseford, who, if you're not familiar with him, he records like Nickelback, and he's their engineer. And he was describing his mixes as cartoon mixes and making them sound larger than life. And yeah, when you listen to that, it absolutely is. Like, it's so modern and sampled and all this completely different approach to how you're doing it, which is way more organic and just true to the actual like musicians themselves and their gear, right?
Right. I mean, and the thing, man, I have a lot of respect for cats who can do that, because I can't. What I mean? Like, I don't know if I just haven't had the opportunity to even try to do that. So I can't say that. I'm not going to say I can't do that, but I guess I haven't had the opportunity to even to attempt it or whatever. But people come to me for what I do.
Exactly.
And I've just been doing it a long time. Right. Exactly. But yeah, man, it is wild. I mean, just the other night, a couple weeks ago, I guess, we were at a Red Sox game, and there was a rain delay. And so we were just kind of hanging out. My whole family, we didn't have anywhere to go the next morning or whatever. It was like a Wednesday night, what I mean? So we were just like hanging out. But in between, they were like playing a bunch of music over the PA, and they were going from like old school stuff. And then I remember a few tunes came on, and I was like, it sounds like a cartoon. I mean? Like the vocalist, it sounded like a cartoon character. It was so like cartoonish, what I mean? But it was, and I was like, yeah, it's just wild. I was like, yeah, I can't do that, that's, it's cool,
yeah,
I mean? But
it's that, like, that's the, whether it's an era of music or it's a genre of music, it's all kind of just like a sound, and it's like a snapshot of, whatever you want to call it, that genre, if you want to say it that way, and so there are so many different sounds out there, and it's like a matter of just finding what is your what you enjoy the most and what you like to work on.
Exactly. Yeah.
As far as that kind of organic, natural sound, then, do you have any tips for capturing that vintage tone?
Sure. Okay. So one, don't be afraid. Well, okay. If we're talking about the listeners are experimenting or just recording a band in the studio, okay. If you're just the engineer, you're recording a band in the studio. Don't be afraid of bleed. A lot of times when I have bands come in here, I'll have them set up and I'll just have them start playing before I even give them any headphone mixes. So just play. If you guys can, and I noticed that if the band gets comfortable, just let them play for a while. Let them get acclimated to the space. And once they acclimate, if everyone can hear each other, and really maybe not need headphones unless maybe they're like, in some cases they do, but I would say just don't be afraid of that. It's like, oh, we got to put the guitar in this room, 20 meters down the hall, and we got to do, all this kind of stuff. Like, man, well, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot right from the beginning, like that's because that's not, if you look at, a lot of recordings that were going down at Stax, Motown, all over. A lot of that stuff was recorded in one room, and people were playing to each other, playing with each other, to each other, and the microphones were doing the same thing. Now, with that said, you have to be mindful of the type of microphones you're using in most cases. Again, there's no rules. You can do whatever you want to do. But if you want to have some sort of success in this, I wouldn't necessarily record, especially like a room like mine. It's not a small room. It's not a huge room. But I wouldn't mic everything with Omni mics. You know what I mean? Like, because... So, just kind of learning about, microphone patterns and how those patterns can benefit you in a situation when you're kind of have a band set up in one room, in a space. That goes a long way, to capturing that kind of sound, on the technical end.
So it sounds like, bleed is obviously going to be something that you're going to have to just deal with when you're playing in a room with other people. So is it the microphone positioning that you're using to kind of eliminate some of that bleed, or are you just totally embracing it and like whatever gets in there you use?
Well, that's the funny thing. It's a little of both. Now, people who aren't, if they've come to my studio for the first time, I always love the moment where I get to, like I said, I have them play for a little while, get comfortable. Now I'm always recording. And then they stop and take a little break and come back into the room. And then I just hit play. And then I start soloing, thinking, oh, here, listen to the guitar. And they're like, wait a minute, where are the drums? The guitar amp is not far from the drum set in here. You know what I'm saying? But, it's pointed at the right angle. So there's a little, the rejection is happening, So I guess the thing is, and this idea really came to me, not the idea, but example is when I started mixing a lot of live recordings, like concert, like old Soulive stuff and things like that. And then all of a sudden you realize you solo like a guitar microphone or whatever. And you're like, I don't hear a lot of anything but guitar. You may hear a little bit of something else, but in most cases, it's your headphone bleed is going to be worse into a vocal microphone, than this. So I guess people get really caught up about microphone bleed and separation before they even try it. You know what I'm saying? It's like this concept out there, like, oh, you have to put the guitar amp in a room over here. You got to put the Leslie in a room over here. You got to have the bass amp in here and the drummer all by himself in the room. and you just do that. It's like, oh, that's great. But you didn't try, like, you didn't experience what that bleed actually is. You've read about it, you heard about it, but when you actually hear it, you're like, that's not that bad. And then when I tell, and with that said though, I always tell people, man, when in doubt, lay out. So it's like you're recording a cut and like the guitar player's feeling good. Hey man, you want to take that guitar solo? Cool. It may be a problem later. You know what I'm saying? Like some of that phantom, your other take may come through some other stuff. You know what I mean? So just know like, hey, it's cool to just play rhythm during the guitar solo and we'll come back and overdub it. So there are things that, I do, selectively, choose to be an overdub or, in its own space. And again, that's the only reason why, really. But it's all about just trying it. It's just amazing people don't try it. Everyone has an opinion on like why not to do it, but you've never done it. So
I love it. I think that, when you are just getting to this, especially these days, if you fall into that rabbit hole of YouTube or whatever, it's like you tend to learn these like so-called rules of recording and then you just stick to it and you haven't really experimented. It's like, you probably always place the microphone in the exact same spot every single time, and maybe a lot of these people have never even tried to move the microphone to hear what it does, if you just angle it or if you move it from one side to the other, like, and there's so much value in that experimentation because that's when you learn how to play your equipment. It's not just playing the instrument. It's like playing your equipment like it's an instrument almost, and using that to get your tones. And so, I love what you said there about the bleed because, everyone's taught like bleed is bad, or like clipping is bad, but a lot of this kind of older vintagey sound has so much saturation and all sorts of distortion in there. So it's like there are things that can be used to your advantage that people are probably just avoiding because they've been taught a certain way to do it and they don't know any other way.
Right. Well, there's the key word there is taught. And that a lot of people aren't being taught. And that's the thing. Like I had the opportunity to work in studios with engineers and I was being taught. There's a difference between having like a one-on-one kind of learning experience rather than going down a YouTube wormhole. You're learning something. I guess my parents were teachers, so I have a little different perspective on this. Like of course I go on YouTube and when I check things out, I want to, this new plugin came out, I want to check it out or whatever, or this technique or whatever. But there's something to be said about gaining this knowledge, you know what I'm saying? Like just in mass, you know what I mean? Rather than like just getting a little bit, trying it out from a person that you can try it out. Well, and that's the other thing. It's so easy these days there's a million ways to do mic a guitar or use this compressor or whatever, this plugin or whatever. And it's just like, it's kind of overkill, you know what I mean? Whereas a lot of times what I do, I'll pick a day and I'll come into the studio. I have nothing on the schedule or my only, the only thing I'm going to accomplish is experimentation. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, and it may be just like one microphone, it may be one plugin, it may be whatever, but I'm not going to like just start mixing the song with this new, whatever I've checked out, you know what I mean? Or whatever it is. I'm going to dedicate some time to messing around. And I feel like in my experience of teaching, I've found that a lot of people don't do that. You know what I mean? They're kind of more like, it's cool to experiment, like when you're recording or mixing something for somebody or for yourself. But I feel like it's a lot more fun, at least for me, to do that when I have no intentions of anything being released or getting. So there are a lot of times, man, I'll come into the studio, I will spend an entire day and be like, wow, that was whack. That just didn't work. And I'll just leave like, hey, whatever. But I learned something. You know what I mean? I gained something from that.
For sure. I love that, man. I think that there's so much, like, people feel so much pressure to always like accomplish something amazing whenever they start working on their stuff. And it's like, you need to accept that it might not always be amazing. And that's a good thing.
Exact, man. You know, the funny thing is I was just having this conversation with my wife the other night. We were taking a walk. Man, I'm 47 years old, right? And I finally got to a point now. It's really interesting, but I was saying, like, I'm mixing this album for somebody, for a band. And the mix notes I've gotten back consistently for a little while now are usually 2 notes, and it's very small stuff. It's like, can you bring this up a little bit, or can you whatever? It's nothing like these drastic notes. I used to get like tons of notes, and I get all kind of stressed out because, oh man, I missed the mark. You know what I mean? Like, oh, like now, like I just mix. Cool, I'm good. I'll send it. Don't even think about it. I'm not worried about what they're going to think about it or whatever. I just send it, and I get back. I'm like, all right, cool. Yeah, it's cool. Take me a couple minutes to do those revisions. No problem. Now, that's not because I'm like bragging or whatever. But the point is, man, I'm 47 years old. I've been doing this since I was like 13 or 14 years old. You know what I'm saying? It takes time. I've done a lot of things where I can listen back now. I'm like, oh God, what was I thinking? You know what I mean? Like, and so the thing is, man, what I realized also is, and kind of like what you said, you know, like, you have to, it's one thing to just sit up in your studio and just like mess around and do all this and that, you know, and like, oh yeah, it's not good yet, or blah, 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 whatever. The thing is, man, none of that matters. Like you can play it for your girlfriend or your brother or whatever, and chances are they're gonna be like, oh yeah, that's cool, or they're just not gonna care at all, you know. Man, it's nothing. None of that is gonna matter until you put it out. Once you get feedback from strangers, from people, you know what I'm saying? And people are like, oh man, and they could be, you know, your peers or whatever, you know, recording peers or just people, fans of music, like, oh man, that sucks. That snare drum is horrible, blah, blah, blah. That kind of feedback is super crucial, you know what I mean? To like getting, super crucial to getting out of your shell, you know what I'm saying? Like, and really like listening and examining your own work. So yeah, I mean, you can, like you said, you can sit around for days, months. People do, and they're tweaking stuff. Man, just put it out. You know what I mean? There's going to be another record to make. There's, you know what I'm saying? There's going to be another single to put out, but you're really not going to learn. You're not going to find your own sound until you get that feedback from the world.
Of course. And there's that learning experience too of just being able to stop a mix and give it to the artist as well, and just say like, here's where I'm at. What do you think? Because you can tweak forever just thinking you need to keep finding problems in your mix and like you're going to fix all of these things. But at the end of the day, like maybe the artist is like, this is already awesome. Like, this is great. Let's leave it as is.
Exactly.
And it's not that like, it's not like you're being lazy about it. It's like, sometimes you can go too far. Problem with searching for problems is that you're always going to find a problem.
You're going to find a problem.
And you're just going to keep going down this rabbit hole of like, I got to just keep fixing and fixing. And then you eventually kind of undo all of the good stuff that you've already done.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost like you need to sometimes like put restrictions on yourself and say like, I'm only going to mix a song in a few hours. And once that 3-hour timer hits, like mix is done, sending it off, getting feedback. Because you could mix for like a week straight trying to make this perfect masterpiece, and then the band says it sucks. So, you know. Yeah, exactly. But again, that all comes with, you know, you have to do it a lot. It comes with experience. And that's actually one thing I was talking to my wife about on that walk. I was like, you know, it doesn't take me long to mix tunes anymore. Like, it really doesn't. The thing is, I feel comfortable in my instincts. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing to
again, go back to being book smart about mixing, whatever the hell that means. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know this compression rate and this attack and release time, all this kind of, man, whatever. You know, like, that's good to learn, but at some point you have to like embrace what are you hearing in your mind? That's what matters. You know what I mean? Like, the stuff that you hear in your head, get to it. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's the thing, like, now I just like, I feel comfortable with my instincts, you know what I mean? Like, and again, but it just takes time. And like I said before, I'm not a master. There's still a lot to learn. But every time I send a mix to somebody, or every time I put an album out and I listen to it out in the world, you know what I mean? Like, you learn something. Like, oh, I'm never going to do that again. Or, that's actually kind of dope. I'm going to keep doing that. You know what I mean? I can push that, or I should have done more. I can push the envelope a little bit more on whatever. But yeah, like, you know, you have to give yourself time away from it.
Absolutely.
Again, going back to put it out, because after that, it's out in the world. And then you're going to hear it, you know, like somewhere, you know, someone's going to comment on it. But yeah, just keep hitting like rewind and back to the start and play, and back to the start, play for hours and months. And man, yeah.
Well, yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. I think there's just so much to learn when you actually spend the time and are willing to mess up. And yeah, I love that, man. I love that. One thing I did want to ask you about is I've always really loved the sound of your drum tones, and I love like that. I love like the soul drum sound. You know, there's something to it where it's like there's like some saturation and there's like this tightness to it, and also like it's just a sound that isn't like anything else. And so I was wondering if you can share some tips on how you tend to get your drum sounds and what that process looks like for you.
Again, I mean, I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but it's all about the drums, really, for me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm lucky enough that I have a lot of drum sets here. I got a lot of drums. So depending on the style or the mood, or a lot of times I'm thinking like decade, you know, like, what decade would this song live in? And I just go for that drum set, you know? But then, so that's part one. Part two is a lot of stuff that I do, when, for my own music and for people who are cool with it, it's very minimal miking. I mean, most times it's like 3 or 4 microphones, you know what I mean? Like, and that depends. I mean, if I took a photo of my setup, you'll see more microphones, but a lot of times those aren't even being recorded. You know, like the toms are mic'd up, but maybe I don't even record those, you know what I mean? Or I have stereo overheads, but most time I just record one of them, the mono. Like, I have a mono mic, you know what I mean? And then the other one is like, then all of a sudden it becomes stereo if I want, you know, or if the person in here wants that kind of sound. So that's, yeah, just minimal microphones. And then, again, I love saturation, you know, like saturation is like, for me, it's like, that's what creates that excitement. You know what I mean? So again, like, you know, like I said earlier, man, if I sent you like some multi-tracks of like the kick and snare, like, man, they're pretty grimy, you know what I mean? Like, on their own. But in the big picture, it just sounds like a drum set to me, you know what I mean? Like, and again, going back to my, you know, I used to cut things super clean, you know what I mean? Because that's like, I was just kind of timid about it, you know, but then I'd listen and I'm like, man, they're not cracking, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not what I was hearing in my head until I like really started following that. Well, what am I hearing in my head? Well, they're not clean. They're not clean at all, you know, like, so I was like, all right, well, let's get some grime on them. And bam, there you go. There it was, you know? So I do that. I push preamps, you know what I mean? Like I said, I have some outboard stuff that I use, but then, again, I'll push the virtual preamps as well, you know what I mean? To a point where it just gets that sound, like, and so anyway, I guess that's the thing, man. It's like, for me, it's all about getting the sound in the moment. So when I push the faders up and you hit play before you mix, like once you're done tracking, it just, for me, it should sound like a pretty damn close to being a record. So, and that's it, it's just, and it always it comes down to the player, like, I'm lucky enough that I can play the stuff that I'm hearing in my head, but I'm also lucky enough to have a lot of cats who come through the studio who can do the same, and then what I like to do, again, going back to getting the sound right going in, is that's inspires the musician, the drummer, or we're speaking about drums right now. So if there is a situation where we do have headphones, right? Man, I have that sound going to their head. So they sound like they are listening to the record when they're playing. So then that inspires the performance. Very much so, just like, like with a guitar. You know what I mean? Like you spend all this time on amps and pedals and this and that, because that's going to inspire your playing. I mean, yeah, sure, you could just record direct and get it later, but you're not going to, like, if you don't have that delay there, you're not going to play, you're going to play too much probably because the delay isn't there. But if you have an echo or a delay, then all of a sudden you're going to not play as much because you're hearing what's going on. That's inspiring your playing. Same with drums, man. Like, it's pretty simple to me. I don't know.
Well, I love it. I mean, there's a few things that I want to unpack from that as far as the drums go. So you were talking about like minimal miking, and I think that again, maybe going back to like kind of, we're taught you should have a mic on everything and like capture it all so you can, like get rid of it if you don't need it, kind of thing, right? But like you're just committing to the tones. And as far as like your kind of most common miking setup goes for the drums, you said you typically use like 3 mics on drums. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, that's probably that's the meat of it. Yeah. So kick, snare, over, and then I have like this other mic that kind of lives out in front of the drum set, maybe about, I don't know, it looks about 3 feet or so, and it's like this crazy like old 70s Japanese microphone. Like on its own, it sounds like really kind of bizarre, but in a good way, but so that I kind of fill in with that. It's just like a vibe kind of thing. And then I have a microphone up in the ceiling that captures the entire room, so that plays maybe just a little role, but yeah, man, I mean, it's just kick, snare, over. So I'm assuming a lot of what you're working on, maybe not all of what you're working on, but there's a large part of it that is mono based in your mixes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And the thing is with me, and I kind of approach everything, again, going back to old school, it's kind of like that LCR approach in a way. Sometimes I do capture the drums in a stereo manner, it's basically with just like overheads, and then with the addition of tom mics, you know what I mean? But again, but with that said, I don't like the overly stereofied version of the drums, you know what I mean? Just my technique, I just like them to sound like they're still in the center, I guess, in a way, you know what I mean? Like, so generally with me, like say if I have a rack and a floor mic, which I've been doing a lot lately, I was actually, and even when I get stuff that comes in, I'll just put I listen to the overheads first. Like, where are the toms in the overheads? Then I'll just put the toms where they are, where I'm feeling them in the overhead mics. So I don't do the rack tom is way left and the floor is way right. You know what I mean? Like, because that starts to kind of play with the phase of things, and then we're kind of getting down the technical rabbit hole right now. But so that's one side of it. But also, it doesn't. I don't like to feel like well. So you do that, okay? Say if you have this wide drums, big drums, right? For me, it's like then also, well, where's the guitar player? You know what I mean? I'm always thinking of like, I like, it's kind of on my meter bridge, I'm always like imagining like the players where they are, you know what I mean? So if you have the drums are like this big, like, so you're telling me all the other instruments are inside of the drums? Again, this is just me.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
I'm a very visual mixer, you know what I mean, or producer or mixer. So,
yeah, you're picturing it like a band's on stage or something, and like, where would they be?
Exactly. Yeah. Or in a space on stage or in a whatever it is. Yeah. But so the same thing with like Leslie. I mean, I have a Hammond organ here, and same thing. I have 3 mics on my Leslie, but the majority of the time it's mixed in mono. And so people, well, why do you have 3 mics on it? If it's you might as well just put 1 mic on. Well, the thing is, there's the difference in time, and from when the sound is getting to the first microphone on top and the second microphone on top, it's causing that effect. So even in mono, you're still kind of hearing it. So again, it's not like it's super like wide. Then all of a sudden I'm thinking the same thing. Well, now the whole band is inside the Leslie. Like there's no room. So I find that I'm able to create, and this again goes back to a lot of the records I grew up listening to, and kind of how learning from my older brother, this audiophile about where to place things in a stereo field. Because right now we're still, for the most part, mixing stereo. Although that's about to change, or it is changing. But so I feel that you're able to create bigger, wider mixes with a lot of mono elements placed in that stereo field, rather than a bunch of stereo elements placed in the stereo field. So
yeah, it makes sense. Like
again,
if everything is always wide, then there is nothing wide. It's all the same.
Exactly. Yeah. So
yeah, I love that, man. I think that's such I love the way you visualize it and the way you describe that, because yeah, it makes sense. Like, you're going to have things in a room and they're going to be positioned in a certain spot, and that's what's going to give you that wide sound, and that's what's going to sound natural in a room, as opposed to everyone being inside the drum kit or Leslie or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just how I'm a very visual person when it comes to that, like when I'm deciding on panning things, I close my eyes, you know what I mean? Like, and that's like again, kind of going back to my early days before we had a monitor to look at, you know what I mean? Like, all you had was just the console and, some speakers, like there was no visual cue there, so it was all in your mind as to where so I kind of take that same approach. Sometimes I just turn the monitor off or whatever, or I just close my eyes and I just listen, like, where does this belong? You know what I mean? It's like, I don't punch in I was going to say I don't necessarily punch in a number, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, I just listen to where it should be. Yeah,
you're not going based on like a gut instinct of like, I always just do it, or like, not gut instinct, but like a habit. You're not just putting things there for the sake of just doing it because you always do it.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't say when I'm starting, when I was just mixing early before we got on, there was like drums, the drums and bass, everything was sounding good. Okay, so what's the next element that, that's coming in? Okay, guitar. All right, well, I'm just going to push that all the way to the left. Okay, I have bass, drums, guitar. Now guitar's all the way to the left or something like that. So then it's like, okay, what's the next element coming in? So then it's just kind of like putting this puzzle together, because I've already kind of committed to like this one guitar. Now, I'm not going to say maybe it moved based on the rest of the arrangement, but yeah, you have to start somewhere, you know what I mean? So
absolutely,
out of habit, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I guess at the end of the day, you're constantly reevaluating your mix to see, like, does the mix feel balanced? And if you're gonna start off with a guitar on the left, it's like what's going on the right to offset, like to balance that a little more.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of like the concept of what do they call carving frequencies out to make room for whatever. Like, again, like I can kind of dig that. I mean, I use a lot of, not a lot. I like a high pass filter for things, sometimes a low pass filter for things as well. You know what I mean? But again, before like you start carving things out, like that whole concept doesn't really make any sense to me. But hey, I know, like you said, man, like people are going to listen to me like, oh, you're crazy, man. I do it all the time. Hey, man, cool. It works for you, dude. You know what I mean? Like, that's awesome. But for me though, mixing is about balancing. You know what I'm saying? For me, like before, like EQ or whatever, it's just balancing. And so that's the thing. It's like, that's why I like to close my eyes and really pay attention to where things are. Because a lot of times you may have a buildup of something, well, because those two instruments are in the same kind of space. Sometimes all you got to do is move it somewhere else and it's opens things up. So
for sure.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I also think too that has to do with, like in the recording stage, you're aware of all these moves you're making as well. So you're already envisioning where things are going to go. You might even be auditioning, panning while you're tracking as well. So you already have that sense of like, okay, I don't need to add a high pass filter on this or a low pass filter, because I'm just going to move the microphone. And then you're making moves like that to basically save yourself from having to do it in the mixing stage. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing, man. Like, when a lot of people will, if you would look at my, my mixes, my mix template or whatever you want to call it, but not even the mix template. I'd use one, but the final mix, you won't find a lot of EQ. I pretty much none. You know what I'm saying? But again, it goes back to, and if there is, it's more of, corrective kind of, there was a problem going on that I didn't catch or in a lot of cases, I didn't record the thing, you know what I mean? So, but yeah. I mean, I definitely do that when I'm recording, like on the console, like I'm panning things so I can hear them, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, this makes sense, like, okay, cool. And then if it doesn't, like, hey guys, maybe that riff there it's fighting, there's some, if that's intentional, cool, but sometimes we can work on it or with my own self, you know what I mean? Like if I'm producing my own thing that I'm playing, like a lot of times the ideas sound great, like, when you're driving around the car or whatever, when then you get to the studio, like, oh man, like just too much going on, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, again, like I try to make it the mixing part of it about balancing, and so making those choices going in.
I love it. Yeah, that sounds smart, and I think committing to those sounds early is going to shape your mix. So it's like you can shape it in the recording stage or you can shape it in the mix, but it's probably better to do it earlier on and save yourself that trouble. Especially if you're going to keep a static setup, like you said, like where you have everything mic'd already. It's like once you found those sweet spots, you've already done like half the work, like your mixes are all going to have some consistency to them, which is great.
Well, yeah, that's true. But the other thing that I discovered, I remember I had a band in here like years ago, and they had, I think, 2 or 3 different drummers, not at the same time, but like one day, it was a multiple day session. And one day, drummer 1 came in. And I remember the next day, the second drummer came in. And I said, hey, man, like move everything, like this is your drum set. This is just do whatever you want. He was like, nah, I'm good. And he literally sat down and played the exact setup that the cat played the day before. Those two, they literally sounded like completely different drum sets. He didn't change one thing. I didn't move one microphone, nothing. And it sounded like 2 completely different, setups, you know what I'm saying? So, it has a lot to, that's the deal with piano. Like if you think about it, like piano should sound the same all the time, right? I mean, if you break it down, like there's what's changing? But man, you listen to like McCoy Tyner, Herbie Hancock, and Oscar Peterson all play the same piano. It's wildly different. They will sound like a completely different instrument. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's just like the touch. It's like the personality, the feel of the person. You know what I mean? So,
well, another thing that you'd mentioned when we were talking about your drum sound that I wanted to dig in a little bit more about is saturation. And I think that saturation is such a crucial part of that kind of vintage sound. Let's talk about that, because I feel like, you know, again, going back to like these rules of audio that we're taught, it's like, don't clip. That's what we're taught. But there's such good, like, so much amazing stuff in saturation sometimes. So how do you go about dialing in saturation, and what's your normal process look like when it comes to adding it?
So a lot of how I explain saturation and it's in mixing, recording and mixing in general. I compare it to guitar playing and a guitar setup, I should say, in that it's all about gain staging, right? So now you mentioned clipping. Now, when I'm going in to my setup, into my console, which is also my converters, I'm not clipping the converters. Okay, like so the thing is, so it's all about gain staging. And so I'm getting that saturation at I'm hitting my mic preamps in a certain way. So luckily I'm driving the input, you know what I'm saying? Like, so it's like, oh, okay, that sounds really good. Then I'm very mindful of the output, you know what I'm saying? Like and I'm lucky in that. So that's the thing. It kind of goes back to, I sometimes I say, oh, it's not about the gear, but part of it is, you know what I'm saying? Like, so if you have like a preamp that just, it's like the input and the output is the same, it's just like one knob, you're probably going to have a little more difficult time getting that saturation going on, rather if you have input and an output. You can drive that input circuit, you can drive that, that transformer, but then you're able to go out of it into your interface or whatever at a, decent level, and and so I'm able to do the same thing again. I mean, and you can do the same thing in the land of plugins, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, be cool with your, be mindful of how hot you're going into your interface. But then once you get in there, it's all about input and output to me. You know what I mean? Like it's just as simple as that. And I think a lot of people just, unfortunately don't understand that, or don't have access to gear that allows them to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's not about like feeding a signal into your DAW and seeing the red lights clipping there, because that's when you've probably done it the wrong way. Where what you're saying is like you're using gear that allows you to distort it and then trim the level so that it's coming in at a comfortable level, and you could push that even hotter and whatnot in the mix, but you have that ability to do so.
Right. So, I know that, and sometimes that can be difficult. Again, it can be difficult if you don't have I hate to say the right gear or whatever, but you know what I'm saying? Like the cost of the gear doesn't matter, but it's just the functionality of that piece of gear is super important, Absolutely. Yeah. Like
it seems like a lot of budget interfaces these days only have like the one knob preamp, and you can't really do anything with those. Even some high end ones, like I'm just looking at my Universal Audio Apollo and it's like, it's just a one knob preamp. So, but I guess if you were to use their like digital saturation like plugins, then I can mess with it there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, obviously I know you're saying yeah, exactly. I mean, that's, if you have like all the UAD stuff and whatever, I mean, that's what they design it for, you know what I mean? But it's like, or Luna or whatever, you know what I mean? So, but again, like I said, like I commit to those sounds rather than waiting till afterwards to get them.
So would you say that with saturation, I mean, it's very easy to overdo it. And I think if you're going to have a lot of tracks that have some saturation on it, like how do you decide how much is too much?
Well, that's all your ears. But again, going back to, I don't, in the tracking phase, maybe I spend a little bit more, I spend a little bit more time in solo mode, but not much at all. I like to listen to recording drums. I like to listen to the drums as a whole. And that's why sometimes I'm surprised. I'll solo I'll just listen to the kick drum as, and I'm like, holy cow, man, that sounds kind of crappy, but it doesn't matter. Like once it's all together, if it sounds good, it sounds good. You know what I'm saying? So, but on the flip side of that, you could take it. It's easy to take it too far when you're just soloing, like the snare drum. Like, oh, I want this, distorted sound or saturated, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that sounds great, and I'm gonna do the same with the overheads. Oh, yeah, that sounds cool. But then when you put it all together, it's just way too much. You know what I'm saying? So, I think the key there is just context, listening in context, in tracking. And especially in mixing, like I said, in tracking, I definitely pay more. I try to pay more attention to what's really going in, because again, I am committing, and I've just definitely been times where I'm like, oh man, that guitar, that preamp that I had on the guitar was clipping, because as the guitar player got in, getting turned up, it was just like hitting too hard, and then, it's not very forgiving, you know what I'm saying? But it's all about listening in context.
Yep, I agree, 100%. That makes a lot of sense. Well, man, I don't want to take up too much more of your time because I know you got some stuff to do, but we can start to wrap up a little bit. If people want to learn more about you and follow you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I guess the easiest thing to do would, you can find me, my studio website is ironwax.com. And that's for the studio, and my record label is vintageleaguemusic.com. And I'm pretty easy to find on all social media, networks or places. Just check out Alan Evans, and you'll find me.
Awesome. And lastly, I always love to ask, like, any cool projects that you're working on right now that you can talk about?
Ooh, right now. Yeah, actually. So, yes, right when, before we got on, I was mixing a song for a new, actually two things, for my label, actually. The first band is called, On the Spot Trio, and it's some wild stuff, man. It's kind of like Afrobeat, psychedelic Afrobeat funk. And it's man, these cats are going in, so that's awesome. And then the other album that I'm working on is a funk big band, that I've done a few albums for, called the BTALC Big Band. And that's like, it's usually about 17-piece band, somewhere around there. And that's some straight up funk, man, but with a lot of horns and great writing, great arranging. That's just another perfect example of, man, just put up the microphones and don't mess it up, because these dudes aren't, So those are two things I'm really, really excited about right now. And yeah.
Love it, man. Can't wait to check it out.
Works. Yeah, me too.
Awesome, man. Well, Alan, thank you so much for being on here. I just think that, like, you gave us some really cool insight into your process, and I love your approach to it. It's kind of, it's refreshing, because I feel like I interview a lot of people who have that very hyper produced sound, and I love that you're just stripping it back and making it super organic, and the less is more approach, and accepting bleed and all that kind of stuff. Like, I love that, because it just really takes it back down to the foundations of the music. And when you listen to your recordings, there's that tone to it, there's a character to it that is so pleasing to the ear, and you're just absolutely crushing it, man. So keep up the great work.
Oh man, that's really good to hear, man. I'm thank you.
So that was my interview with Alan Evans, and I just love his approach to recording. I think that with today's modern recordings, especially in rock music, we have this tendency to overdo everything and add so many samples and all these layers and just really overcomplicate the process. And I love that Alan's approach is just really bringing it back to basics and keeping it super simple. And it gives a really organic sound to his recordings. And when you listen to his tracks, like, it's clear, like, these have an old school vintage vibe. And that's not a sound that you hear much these days. I actually think it's really difficult to get some of that vintage sound these days because, we're so conditioned to overcomplicate our processes. And Alan is just like, screw that. Let's just simplify this and minimal miking and all that kind of stuff. It really has a cool sound to it. I grew up listening to soul music. My parents listened to a lot of the early Motown stuff. So Alan has definitely preserved that sound in his recordings. And Alan is just one of those people who is putting out amazing recordings with that vintage soulful sound. So definitely make sure to check out his recordings if you've never heard any of his stuff before, because I think it'll really place you back in time and you'll really love it. So I hope that you really enjoyed that episode, that you found it helpful and got lots of great tips out of it, just like I did. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, definitely make sure to subscribe so that you're up to date on all of the new episodes as they're released. We're going to be trying to release new episodes every Wednesday. So by subscribing, you'll get the notification once the new episodes are live. And if you haven't yet done it, make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com. That's where I help musicians create pro-sounding recordings from their home studios so that you can use those recordings to showcase your talents in the best way possible and use them to also grow your career. And while you're there, definitely make sure to check out my book. It's called The Mixing Mindset. And inside of that book, I give you my step-by-step process for creating mixes from your home studio. And we walk through the entire process from your workflow, from the tools, using EQ, compression, automation, all of that kind of stuff. We really dig into the entire process so that you have a clear understanding of what you need to do in order to make your songs sound pro and polished and feel proud of the results of those songs. So once again, check that out. It's called The Mixing Mindset, and that's available at MasterYourMix.com. So that is it for today's episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the very end, and I look forward to talking to you in the next one. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@MasterYourMix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit MasterYourMix.com.